The first was workforce development manager, which is basically anyone who is implementing training programs that help employees upskill. We have had this conversation a lot over 2024 around just retaining top talent and really making sure that you're giving them those opportunities to continue growing and, upskilling, and this becoming a really critical factor for job seekers. Am I going to be able to have upward momentum here, or am I going to have to leave in order to find that?
Initiating becoming a hiring machine sequence in 3, 2, 1.
Hey everyone, it's Sam Keenly, and welcome back to Becoming a Hiring Machine. This is the show dedicated to fixing recruitment by going beyond saying what needs to change and instead teaches you how to make that change. Today we've got a great trending topics episode ahead of us, but before we get into that, I just want to tell you a little bit about the show. Essentially, we have shows within the show here. Some days we have interviews with industry thought leaders and others who are shaking up the space, while other days like today, we cover trending topics. Stop by every Tuesday for a Tactical Tuesday episode where we go deep on how to do something that's going to help you drive better results in your day-to-day. Some days we open up for Q&A, and occasionally you get a mic drop episode from Matt where he shares something he's been thinking about within the recruitment space and wants you to know. Now, as a reminder, if you like the content that we share here on the show, make sure that you subscribe for more. All right, today's trending topics. As you all know, we always have Lex join us for these shows, and she always does a great job of pulling together just different topics, tidbits that we want to cover. Well, she started going above and beyond, and apparently she didn't like my intros, or hers are just naturally better because she's a phenomenal writer, and I just start spewing things out my mouth, which I'm doing right now. So she has written this phenomenal intro that I'm going to get into, and then I bet you can't guess who's going to be joining me for this episode. So the intro for today really is that the beginning of a new year is always filled with insane info dumping on all the things that you should do differently this year, and here's why. So rather than give any one of these bold predictions too much weight, we thought today we'd bring you a rapid fire roundup of studies, data points, and other things that you should have on your radar as we ramp into 2025. So Lex, hopefully I did that justice aside from that little bit of a stammering I did there, but hey, we're all human. I'm doing my best. Lex, welcome back.
Thanks. Happy to be here. Yeah, my writing is very wordy most of the time. So unless I'm actively writing for someone to read it out loud, it's there's some stumbling moments. So you're human. We're all human. I'll write it for you next time.
Perfect. Small words, short sentences, Cro-Magnon. Yes. I'm a simple one.
Got it. Noted.
All right. So 2025. Yeah. We've done a couple predictions episodes at this point and stuff, but yeah, the way that you summed it up is just like, what you did before was wrong. What you did before isn't as good. Here's what you should. And granted, like, yes, we use a little bit of this in our own messaging too, but this is the time of year when all of these usually do start to come out in mass. So I know you went through a couple of these, and I like how you teed it up as like rapid fire. So I'm gonna let you take us through like which ones you thought were most interesting, points that you want to get into, and then we'll rifle through them.
Perfect. Yeah, I always think it's funny that we treat the beginning of the year as if like it is a total clean slate, when in reality it's like, okay, we had a little bit of a break, and now we're kind of continuing on the momentum that's been built in all of the years that have preceded this one. So I think ultimately the biggest things that I want to focus in on today are some data points around fastest growing jobs, some data points around industry sectors that are poised for growth that maybe previously haven't been as quickly growing, or are new industries that are kind of coming onto the scene. And then also we'll get into two just fun studies about the state of job hunting, and then also just kind of like a retro on 2024. So ultimately, we're going to keep it super high level and just kind of dig into each of these things and have conversation around some of these interesting data points. But we're not making any crazy predictions because we know for a fact most of the time these predictions don't come true. They're just based off of gut feelings that aren't super validated. So rather than spend too much time in that esoteric space, we're going to just kind of actually be a little bit more practical today.
Perfect. Can't wait. Yeah. All right. Let's do it.
Okay. So the first one that I want to get into is LinkedIn released their 25 fastest growing jobs of 2025. I don't want to get into every single one of those. I'll link the article in the show notes, so if anyone wants to read it, they can. But there are some unsurprising things here and some, at least to me, slightly surprising ones. So on the unsurprising side, lots of AI. I think that there were 3 or 4 AI specific job titles that are predicted to be growing in the United States in 2025. AI engineer, AI researcher, AI consultant, and there was one around prompt engineering as well. So again, not entirely surprising given the fact that AI has been the dominating conversation of 2024, but it is surprising when you look back on the fact that most of these jobs did not really exist in a technical sense a year and a half ago. So it is fascinating to see that 4 of the 25 fastest growing jobs for this year are relatively net new jobs in general.
With this study, was it looking at the fastest growing by like count of the jobs that they've seen or percentage growth year over year?
Percentage growth year over year, I believe. I have the study pulled up so I can dig into it in a second, but I believe it was percentage year over year.
And that makes sense. It's like infinite growth year over year. Yeah, some of these things, it's like, okay, well, if there were literally like 10 people before.
There were 0. Yeah.
Yeah, so.
There was like that one guy.
Yeah, and they're also.
It was, yeah. No, for sure.
Okay.
That one I thought was, again, unsurprising, but surprising in the context of the grand scheme of things. One that I did find relatively surprising was the fact that there were a ton of jobs in the nonprofit space that were predicted for growth in 2025. A lot around fundraising. Director of development was a big one. Some grants writers from both the freelance and like outsourced grant professionals perspective, as well as in-house grants managers, people who are seeing the entire fundraising cycle from end to end, as well as event roles, whether it's event managers, event planners in the nonprofit world, and just for in-house companies. So interesting. Again, when we see these roles starting to pick up, it does give us a picture of what companies are prioritizing in the year ahead. And so we're back to events. That's not really necessarily new either. 2024, we saw a ton of events starting to come back into the fold, but we're seeing companies and nonprofits starting to really invest in events again. And we're going to see that kind of play out through our hiring trends as well.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I wonder how much, again, I know we've talked generational stuff before. We're speaking in generalizations as we do it, but I wonder how much of that is driven by the Gen Zs that are coming along, like what they're interested in, being so passion driven and everything else. I don't know if they're starting those up. I don't know. That'd be a kind of like a secondary drill down. I'll just be curious to see.
Totally. I think that there's also some trends around political climate and just like post-election year. We generally do see an uptick in certain roles when it comes to, social initiatives. These kind of like, there's new passion and excitement around kind of investing in these areas in a more grassroots way. So I'll be curious to see how that plays out specifically. And if that is something that is kind of part of a larger trend, or if it's just a 2025 thing, how does this kind of fall into the mix?
Okay.
So the next section of roles that we saw a lot of growth, that we're predicting a lot of growth in, according to LinkedIn, are technical roles in terms of like infrastructure, which I found kind of interesting. Bridge engineer was one of the top 25 fastest growing jobs. I'm like, I didn't realize we still had so many bridges left to build, but bridge engineers are going to be a highly sought after role in 2025, according to LinkedIn. So this is an interesting one where we talk a lot about niching down. There's a lot of these really interesting niches that are growing very rapidly that to me are an opportunity for a recruiter who's kind of looking to find their niche. There's bridge engineer, community planner. There was one specific to, just like logistics of community and city planning specifically. So there's a lot of interesting things where it's like, those don't come to mind instantly when you're thinking through a list of jobs that someone could have. So it does kind of present an interesting opportunity. One that falls into that category as well is sustainability specialist. This is one that kind of, again, is that toggle between something on like the nonprofit side of things. And then also a lot of for-profit companies are starting to invest in roles specific to sustainability, whether that's corporate social responsibility or just sustainability in terms of their processes and how they're actually, conducting their business. So that's an interesting one that I think that there's going to be a lot of opportunity for in the coming years. And I find that one really interesting.
Yeah. Bridge engineers.
Engineers. I know. I was like, okay, I guess that's an opportunity I had not yet considered. But, if the whole brand and content thing doesn't work out, maybe I could bridge engineer.
I did pretty good in fourth grade. Also wood bridges. So, and with the spaghetti noodles. So, hey, let's give it a shot, right?
That's one job that AI will not be taking anytime soon.
That is true. Okay.
When it comes to HR specific roles, I was actually really, really encouraged to see that there were 2 roles specific to HR and people management that were on the list of 25 fastest growing jobs. So the first was workforce development manager, which is basically anyone who is implementing training programs that help employees upskill. We have had this conversation a lot over 2024 around just retaining top talent and really making sure that you're giving them those opportunities to continue growing and, upskilling, and this becoming a really critical factor for job seekers. Am I going to be able to have upward momentum here, or am I going to have to leave in order to find that? So someone who's kind of in place to create those pathways, that's one role that there's a lot of, momentum building around. And then director of employee relations. So this is another one where, again, creating more of that strong bond between employer and employee and creating pathways for them to enjoy staying at the company for longer, which is definitely a big problem that companies have been seeing in the past 5 to 10 years, is just a lack of retention.
Well, I think companies are getting smarter. They're seeing it from an acquisition of customers, clients, and they're also seeing it from like a employee retention. How much does it cost to bring on new employees versus how much do we invest in them to keep them, to grow them? So everyone knows HR is always the last to usually get pulled into those types of investment, but that's promising that it is finally happening in 2025, hopefully.
Yeah. Out of 25 jobs, to see 2 of them be within the HR space, I thought that was, again, really encouraging and also just interesting to show, again, how our priorities are starting to shift a bit as a culture and as a society. So I thought that was all pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So,
side note for our audience, especially like RPO opportunity right there, like workforce development manager, that's a perfect example of how, you don't have to be in-house at these organizations to do that. That's something that you can absolutely help them with if this is an area of investment. Point to the study, say, here's what they're saying is going to happen. Like, do you have this in place? No, cool. I can help you with that. So
I love that.
Subtle little tie-in for like, you don't have to be an in-house recruiter just to be able to take that type of responsibility or initiative on.
Yeah, that talent advisory mindset is something that I think these really reveal the fact that is becoming more valuable to companies than ever before. And so if you can offer that bundled into your recruitment services and kind of, get rid of their need for a full-time role in this capacity, even better. You've just made yourself even more valuable. So love that. So the next that we're going to get into is just a quick high level on industries that are poised for growth. This came out of a study from PNC Bank. And so the industries that they have on their list were cybersecurity, e-commerce, telehealth, educational services, and alternative energy. So those were the 5 industry sectors and kind of niches that they found were most poised for growth based off of growth in 2024 and then anticipated need in 2025 was kind of how they balanced that. So again, I'll link the study in the show notes, but again, I just think it's helpful to have a little bit of that context around what are the industries that are expected to grow. We've seen a lot of, topics like just general healthcare is on the rise, et cetera. But to like drill down into telehealth is really the only one that made the list on this top 5. Mm-hmm. I find that pretty interesting. That's one that we haven't talked about specifically on the pod before. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, just different food for thought around other niches. Look into how to because sometimes it's like, well, I've always done healthcare, I've always done agriculture, but I've low-key always been like, my family's IT person, like cybersecurity is growing. Like, hey, I might have a little, I don't know, that background knowledge, skill set, desire. Like if I do want to try a different niche, like this is a perfect opportunity. Like what are the ones that are growing? Which ones kind of make sense for my skill set or my knowledge or my interest to want to go and pursue? So I like that you brought this up in terms of not necessarily like stop everything you're doing, go these are the top 5 growing, but it's just having a pulse on which ones are growing, where if it does make sense to add that to your list or anything else, like it's an easy opportunity to add that for yourself.
Definitely. And like you said, it's not like a stop everything and just do this, but these are industries that we can likely expect to continue to grow. And so even if you just take on maybe 1 or 2 clients this year in one of these industries and start to just experiment a little bit with, okay, how does this workflow feel different? Like, what are the different needs? And just familiarize yourself with that. I think it could be an interesting opportunity to just flex and grow a little bit and learn more about a different niche. And you might find that you're actually surprisingly good at recruiting for e-commerce roles, And so I think that this is just a good opportunity to, again, zoom out a little bit, take a look at what's out there and start to see like, where's an opportunity for me to kind of worm my way in here and learn something new and position myself to be relevant and necessary in the coming years. So I always like to just kind of zoom out a little bit like that. So the next piece, we're going to zoom in a little bit more. And this comes from Greenhouse's State of Job Hunting report. They took a look back at 2024, just sentiments in general. They surveyed over 2,500 full-time workers across the US, the UK, and Germany. And there was one data point that I thought was really interesting and a little bit disappointing, honestly. And so I wanted to call this out just to kind of bring it to the conversation. They found that 61% of candidates who participated in the study were ghosted by recruiters after a job interview. And the thing that makes me really sad about that was actually an increase over the year before. And I just was mind blown by that because I feel like we're seeing this conversation so often that it almost feels a little bit like we're beating a dead horse when we say like, don't ghost candidates. Ghosting is bad. Hey, let's try to create opportunities for communication, even if it's a no, I feel like we've had that conversation quite a bit. And so I'm always a little bit hesitant to even bring that into the mix. But when I saw this data point of 61% of candidates have been ghosted by recruiters after a job interview, not even after just like initial email/phone conversation, but after an actual interview. I was just kind of surprised by that, honestly. I was like, oh, it's 2025 and we're still seeing that 61% of candidates are having this problem.
That's wild. 3 out of 5. 3 out of 5. And it's like, we're opening up a few positions here right now. And for example, one of the first things that I did was I've set up an auto sequence so that after they submit an application, they'll hear from us. After a week, we're still going to be just sifting through applications, still doing our own sourcing and everything else. But after a week, hey, just an FYI, here's where we're at. Like, it's not necessarily going to be personalized to every person, but just give an update on where things are at, because that's the main thing. People just want to know. They just want to be informed. They don't want to feel like they're left in the dark. It's so easy with tech today. Like, those little things go such a long way. So again, we can easily bring this number down. In fact, I want to say I'll take it as a personal challenge to reduce that number from 61%, but there are nowhere near enough people who use Loxo to be able to make a dent in that. But whether or not you use Loxo and you're listening to this podcast, like, those are the types of things where, like, it's just simple communication at the end of the day. I know you're getting inundated with applications, with wanting to go outbound with people, but again, that's what tech is here to help with.
Yep. This is a prime use case for AI, for, just really leaning into that. It's one of the rare cases in which AI can help make you more human. It can make your recruitment process more human. And I think that remembering the fact that, strong communication and clear communication with candidates is so valuable to them. These are just people who are trying to find their next step, and having this like vague, just purgatory sense of just waiting for information is so emotionally taxing. And so as much as you can do to create those opportunities in your process to communicate as much as possible with as little, impact and need from you, the better. And so I think that, this is just one of those things where, again, I was kind of surprised by that data point. And then just to further validate that, they, again, across the US, the UK, and Germany, they asked these candidates, what would you like to see more of in the job process and the job hunting process, apologies. They said 47% they would like to see easier discovery of relevant jobs for them, which I thought was interesting. That was the number one response. The second response at 42% was better communication immediately after applying. And then 38% that they would like to know more effective ways to make their applications stand out. So those were kind of the 3 hot button issues for those 2,500 workers who were surveyed.
I like these because all 3 of them are very actionable. Some by software and tech, and some by talent advisors. So even as I just think of like my marketing hat is on for a second. So they want to see an easier discovery of relevant jobs, and they want to see more effective ways to make their applications stand out. So in the rise of long form content, whether it be podcasts, newsletters, LinkedIn, Twitter, wherever you share and create content, if you have an audience that like you recruit specifically for bridge engineers, for example, like being able to say, hey, here's 10 new bridge engineer opportunities that are going out today. You have your network that you share that with. And then you also, in that same newsletter or LinkedIn post or something else, wherever these people spend their time, you're talking about like, here's more ways that you can make your application stand out. Here's more things that you can do to increase your experience. Like, share this knowledge. This is how you become a talent advisor. And again, this is a great way to attract more candidates to you, build out your bench that you can then take forward business development efforts. But yeah, this isn't, I don't think, it's not strictly a tech issue. It's not strictly a recruiter issue. It's a little bit of everything, where there's no one thing that's going to solve all of this. And I think it is just looking at what the market wants and is asking. And then you kind of figure out like, where do I fit into this picture and how can I make the most of it?
Totally. 100%. I don't think I could say it any better than that. Other than, yeah, I love the bridge engineer callback. And I think that we need to find out where bridge engineers are spending their time. Maybe on bridges. I'm not quite sure, but no, I love that. And ultimately, I think that, yeah, these are very actionable things. They're also, easier said than done. I don't want to oversimplify them in any sense, but I do think that, again, really keeping the candidate experience in mind is another one of those things that we talk about quite often, but that I think is becoming increasingly important as, again, digital noise is at its peak. And so finding ways to kind of navigate that landscape and make sure you're standing out to the right people. And you're also being very clear about what you need from candidates so that no one's time is wasted. I think that there's a lot that we can do in that area specifically to make the experience better for all of us.
Yeah.
So the final thing that I want to touch on is just a fun one. I really, really loved this as I was looking back at 2024. Harvard Business Review put out an article called Charts That Help Make Sense of 2024. I'm a very visual person, so I love being able to see some of these data points just really represented well. And so one of them that I thought was really interesting was they measured employee sentiment across 146 companies, like using metrics like pride, motivation, and commitment. And they studied these sentiments. They tracked them pre and post layoffs at a company. So basically, the remaining employees who are not impacted by the layoffs, at least in a very literal and direct sense, how did they feel about the company before the layoff? And then how did they feel about the company even 2 years following a layoff that, again, did not impact their role? The interesting thing that they found was companies that scored higher on pride, motivation, commitment, all of these things pre a layoff suffered way more greatly and way more drastically post a layoff. Even 2 years later, there's a lessened and just kind of like dampened sentiment that really does persist in a way that really the detrimental effects are much greater at a company that had previously high scores, which I thought was interesting. But also, there's a sense of intuitiveness to that in terms of, the ones who you expect more from are the ones who can really hurt you the most. And so I thought that was a really interesting data point, and also just, again, important to remember the fact that things like layoffs, blips on the radar, so to speak, can have a really strong, lasting impact that can be very pronounced. And I think that it's important to keep these things in mind as far as when you're, digging deep on a client and really starting to understand the context of who is this client, what type of roles am I bringing in? Also, like, what is the history here? What's the context as far as like, what do I need to be aware of? Because public sentiments might be, in a certain area. What are the things that I'm going to have to address with candidates? How am I going to navigate this? I think that it's just an interesting thing, especially after a couple of years of many layoffs. This has become just kind of the name of the game. How do you start to just make sure that you're really in the know when it comes to that, and that you have a talk track around those things and are really able to mitigate some of the fears that a candidate might have?
Yeah, this is a wild one. Like, just the human psychology side of it, and something that, yeah, as a recruiter, you're excited, a year later, you finally have the opportunity to start bringing on more roles, but you've got, if they go on backdoor conversation, existing employees, they might feel a little bit of that, see the stuff online, but you're thinking like, oh, we're finally on the upswing, but yeah, I don't know. That's a fascinating one to me. And I think you hit it on the head with just the organizations that are really riding high, we're the next unicorn, we're on a rocket ship. I think you hit it with the expectation part of it, where you have such high expectations that, you know, I'll say those employees might have been at a 5 out of 5 when we know like everything regresses to the mean, like 2.5 out of 5 is probably like the normal. So if you're at a big Fortune 500 company that you come in, you clock out, you're already at that 2.5 out of 5. So layoff happens, you're just like, oh, well, it's going to happen here, versus like when you're at that 5 out of 5, even if you come down to a 3, you're still above the other one, but it's a much more drastic reduction there. So yeah, I mean, we saw that heavily in tech. Like tech was one of the biggest ones impacted with VC and PE money. So I'm not surprised. I wonder how much of that data set was kind of in areas that were more heavily impacted, or, you know, you're jumping onto this rocket ship that's going to take over the world and you're going to make a bunch of money. So it's interesting to see the lingering side of it. I think is probably the most eye-opening part to me.
Definitely. And you touched on a really important thing of just like the internal sentiments might shift in terms of like, yeah, we're back to where we were before. We're in a really great position. We've learned a lot. You know, we've learned this lesson the hard way, and we have a lot of just kind of new perspective. That stuff can all be true, but that doesn't necessarily trickle down as much as you might expect it to. So again, this is where really clear communication becomes super important, and also just not assuming things and really making sure that, you know, again, you mentioned like online reviews. A Glassdoor review from 2021 that's really negative could still impact the way that someone who's just, you know, perusing the web might experience, or what they might expect from your company or brand. And so I think it's just really important, again, to keep the context in mind. Even if it doesn't necessarily seem like it would be relevant anymore, it might be more than you expected to. And that was the biggest thing that kind of, again, surprised me, but also was really interesting and really important about this data specifically.
Mm-hmm. So that was an interesting visual. Like any other, you said you're big into visuals. Like any others that I want to, let's come back up a little bit from that one. Any other fun ones?
Yeah, so there were some other fun ones. I won't get too into the details of them, but I will link again, it's hard to explain a visual, but they did one on how people are using generative AI. So a breakdown of all of the different ways that someone could use Gen AI and how much, you know, each different group of person is using it for X, Y, or Z, which I thought was really, really interesting because, again, I have my specific workflows around AI that I have, you know, just become so familiar and comfortable with that, one, there are things that I hadn't even considered, and two, it was interesting to see how my usage either lines up with or just totally varies from what the norm is. So I thought that was interesting. Another one that was fun and interesting was how the political leanings of beer brands reflect our nation as a whole. So they have a fun visual around that. And then the one that was the most like mind-blowing was they had 570 experts across multiple disciplines rank predictions that had come from 485 other sources. So again, these sources that are just kind of journalists, you know, tech entrepreneurs, whoever who's making these bold claims and predictions about the future of work or just the future in general. They had these experts rank all of those predictions on a time scale and say like what is most likely to happen when. So they have this long chronological timeline in which they've like put all of these predictions. And again, these 570 experts have agreed that this is the most likely path. And one that was really interesting and is specific to this podcast in general was they have 2037 as the year that humans first truly work alongside robot colleagues, which I thought was really interesting.
Okay.
So 2037, it's 2025 now. So we've got 12 years before that happens. The scary one was that they have, let's see what year it was, 2042 as the year that a third world war breaks out, which I thought was definitely depressing and scary. So I was like, I don't know if I needed to see that. I'm sorry for sharing it here. But there were some really interesting data points on that. And just, I think, you know, with all of the conversation around AI, it does feel like we're, you know, at this tipping point where things are going to start changing very rapidly. And I think that that's true, but also seeing like 2037, you know, 12 years away is the first year that we're predicted to work alongside robot colleagues. In my mind, it feels like that could happen in 3 months. You know what I mean? So it was interesting to see like, okay, some of this stuff might be further out than we're kind of making it feel, while other things are maybe actually a little bit sooner and more on the horizon. So again, these are all predictions, and it just is fun to see experts evaluate the legitimacy of other experts' predictions. So
Yeah.
I thought that was a fun one.
That is. So many thoughts on this one. I know the NVIDIA CEO was talking about the other day at CES about like I saw a couple of robotics companies start to tank because he's like, we're still, processing power is not there yet for these fully autonomous robots, but 2037, well, we might have to change our podcast name to like working with a hiring machine instead of becoming a hiring machine at that point, because you might just have one next to you. It's kind of weird to see a timeline set to that, but exciting, scary, a little bit of both. I think so lots to think
Definitely
about.
scary seeing World War III listed anywhere, but
Yeah, I'm just gonna be naive to that one and just forget about that after this conversation.
Totally wipe it from your brain. It's a long way away. I think 2047. We got some time to correct the timeline. So yeah, again, very just more of a fun, silly visual. And there were a couple in there that I thought were fun. So I will definitely drop that in the show notes. If you, like me, are a visual person, definitely take a look at them because they're fun and enlightening at the same time. So
perfect. Well, this was a fun one. I like to go through all of the, what are people saying? What are we supposed to be doing? What are we supposed to make sense of it all? So this was a good way to not just share information with people instead of telling them and let them make their own decisions with it. So
less of a deep dive, more of just kind of a high level drink from the hot fire hose, take what you want, leave the rest behind. So hopefully there's something that resonates in there.
Perfect. Well, appreciate you sharing all these and pulling this together. I know it's always probably fun/frustrating to go through some of this and deciding what do we want to take, what's not quite there from a data standpoint that's worth sharing. So appreciate it. I know our listeners do as well. And yeah, so that'll do it for us. So as we wrap, Becoming a Hiring Machine is a production of Loxo. If you did like this episode, but you're not sure where to go next, we've got a link to a similar one, and you can find those in the show notes in the description of your favorite podcast streaming platform, as well as on our website. We do have full video episodes available on YouTube. If you have questions, send them to us at podcast@loxo.co. And lastly, if you did enjoy this episode, please make sure that you leave us a quick rating in your podcast streaming platform. It only takes you 3 seconds, but it's going to help other recruiters like you to find us. So everyone, that's the show. That was another great Trending Topics episode with Lex. Until next time, bye y'all.